Going back to Lord of the Rings Online in 2024, after almost 4 years of not playing this game, having a look back at what has happened in that 4 years and what's to come in this year. Now, Lord of the Rings Online will always have a special place in my heart. It was the first game where I raided, made friends, and pretty much all the games that I play, whether it's WoW or Guild Wars, I play with people that I met in Lord of the Rings Online. So definitely a game that I always look back fondly, although it stopped becoming my main MMO as I switched more towards Guild Wars. But still, I've been tempted to go back to have a look at some content. Now, I haven't played the game properly, like done progression, 3-man, 6-mans, and raids since Minas Morgul, which I think is the best expansion they've ever released. Absolutely brilliant. However, I did go back to the last raid, Get Up a Hunter, and did play through the content, but it was to the point in the raid cycle where pretty much everybody had it on farm, so I pretty much just got carried through and didn't really get to experience any of the gameplay properly. Now, I would like to preference this video by saying that a lot of the information isn't necessarily proper research that's been verified over and over again, but a lot of it is either things that I've noticed, have a suspicion over, and also a lot is coming from my friends that still play the game. Now, basically, my friends are people that have either been server first or server second, or even both of them, through the 2 raid groups that I kind of spent most of my time playing with, all the way from Mordor all the way through to the current raid, which is I think about 6 or 7 raids, have either been server first or server second, or even both of them. So they are very good players that are very well into the game. They pretty much go on all of the betas, play through the raids, and pretty much just dominate the game in general. So now that we got all that nonsense, my credentials out the way, well, let's have a look at Lord of the Rings Online. I've been playing Lord of the Rings Online pretty much since launch on and off, and kind of only really got into Endgame around the time of the Waste, which was at the 105 cap, which is towards the end of it. But still, really amazing game, and just had so much fun. The storytelling in the game is phenomenal. Like, you pretty much get immersed into the world, and the way it works is basically you start off with the normal kind of storyline of Lord of the Rings. You follow it all the way through to the Rings Destruction, spoiler alert on that obviously, and then basically once you're into Mordor, you go into almost a New Game Plus type of style where they kind of create their own story and narratives, and they try to remain fairly lore accurate. A lot of players and people that enjoy Tolkien's work obviously praise the game because of the way that they kind of convey and tell the stories, and it's kind of true. Obviously, because of the game engine, storytelling and questing is kind of like limited to somewhat of a degree, but for what they have, they do a fairly good job. Now let's go into pretty much the biggest controversy of Lord of the Rings Online. So Lord of the Rings Online has been operated by several different companies over its lifespan: Turbine, SSG, then into Daybreak Studios, and currently EG7. So the game's direction has changed slightly, and some of the game studios have done phenomenally well. Like I said before, the 2019 expansion Minas Morgul, that was pretty much around when COVID happened, was phenomenally well done. The storytelling was on point. There was 4 3-mans on launch, 2 physical, 2 tactical, 3 6-mans, a short, a medium, and a long one, and a brilliant raid with obviously Shelob that everyone was super hyped about, and pretty much that expansion was ridiculously good. Now, obviously, this is kind of where the speculation and conjecture comes from. A lot of people have said that ever since the new game studio took over, that a lot of people were released, things like this, and that pretty much it's not the same development team. And you can feel that in this new expansion. So the expansions before were not bad in any degree. They were okay. They weren't as good as Minas Morgul in my opinion, and that's why I kind of never really got drawn back to the game since 2020. But around the time of Minas Morgul, I remember quite clearly people advertising for developers for Lord of the Rings. They were searching for people that were adding to their team, things like this, and you could tell it. They were tackling a lot of balance in the game. They were trying to make classes that were never really that great a better choice, and they kind of made a lot more viability. They made a lot of good choices in terms of the virtue system, in terms of the leveling system, and they created a lot of long-term positives for the game in general. Now, I'm not going to bother talking about all the other expansions and things from that, but I will talk about the most current one. The most current expansion had a lot of controversy around it because basically when they were about to launch it, they had to release content because of the dry spell. So they pretty much released about a quarter of the expansion ahead of time, but then quest packed it, which basically meant that you could only play that region if you bought it or if you had VIP, which was kind of a bit of a slap in the face because then when you bought the expansion, you didn't get that kind of quarter of the expansion beforehand. A lot of players weren't happy because basically it was a reskin of an older area, obviously King's Gondor. You had gone through Gondor before, but this was kind of after the events of Lord of the Rings, so it was like more of a, everything's kind of getting back together. Then you went into Umbar, and this is kind of where the first new area came in, and it was quite a smaller area, although quite nice, quite beautiful, quite well done. So, they kind of saved a little bit of face on the new area. So it was kind of a bit of a weird launch where they had only released portion of the map beforehand because they needed players to have some sort of content. Then they released expansion, and obviously players played through the rest of the content. Kind of a bit of a set of like, hey, we've already been to this area, we're pretty much paying you a full expansion price for a little bit of a reskin. Then you get to the new area and you're very happy. And then when you got to level cap, you realized how lacking this expansion was. There was no 3-mans compared to Minas Morgul that had 4 on launch. You didn't get any content other than basically your daily system, which were just missions/delve-ins, which is a system they created where you can scale it up, kind of like some sort of a mapping system, say from Path of Exile or something like this, where you can make your instance a little bit harder. You can either do it solo or in groups, and that was pretty much it. So a lot of people were frustrated with this because, first of all, what are you supposed to do at Endgame other than just doing a couple of missions? Second of all, how do I gear? There's no dungeons to do gearing in, so this made it frustrating because the best gear in game is either dropped through FIs, which is a very old system, although fairly good that they're actually going back to FIs, because I think that featured instance should be the way that people gear. And then crafting, but it required gilded crafting, which I think is a bit of an outdated system. They should have just made it general crafting, and then obviously through their loot box system. For those who don't know, Lord of the Rings Online has a thing where an open world, you get boxes that drop, and then you can buy keys to open those boxes. Then you can get embers, which you use to buy gear, things like this from a vendor. Now you can get these embers through doing weeklies and things like this, but obviously you get a very small amount. So obviously the pay to win system is another way to gear currently. And that's it. That's where the game's been for 4 months plus. So at the moment, the player base is quite frustrated and yeah, not really exactly having the good time. Now on the flip side of that, a couple of weeks ago, they did release the betas in Bull Roar, which is the test server for the new 3-mans, 6-man and raid. But a very strange decision has occurred in this, where basically that looks like they're going to dump all of it at once. Now, first of all, these instances need work. Some of them are very not really well designed and definitely need a bit of polish. And some of them are kind of like copy-paste in the sense of certain mechanics. Now, how much they can change before they release it is pretty much a question mark. And the way that they're contractually obligated might mean that they might rush these out and they might not be very well done, which could be very sad. There's also one choice that's kind of confused me. It's been announced, but it hasn't been implemented, but I'm pretty sure it will be implemented. And it's to do with the legendary items. Now, as a newer player or someone just looking into the Lord of the Rings Online, you might not understand this, but basically, you get like heraldries and legacies and blah blah blah, all these things you can slot into your legendary weapon and items and whatever to make you do more damage or make your bleed last longer, all these cool things, right? Now, these go from a range and you level them up with different like essences or whatever they're called, I can't remember. Now, currently at this level cap, they start at 500, and at the end of the level cap, which they announced would kind of last almost 2 years, or at least that was what they threw around, at the end, they would go up to 549. Now, what's confusing to me is they have initially, so on launch, they said from 500 to 515. That's like the cap now, and they'll raise it as they release content. Now, usually they do this to help people that are not as good at the game to be able to clear content. So they'll release like a raid, and then eventually what they'll do is they'll up like your legendary item, so you hit harder, you do more damage, you get more stats. They also release better statted gear, like better item level, allowing you to progress further than what your skill will allow you to do. Now, they haven't released any content yet, but with the new dungeons and raid, they're upping the legendary item from 515 to 520, which makes no sense. Why power creep now when you don't need to? There's no content. Just cater the content around 515, and then after like 2 months or 3 months, whenever people have like struggled and they can't clear T2 or T3 or whatever the content is, then give us 5 item levels to help like players do it. It doesn't make sense in my brain. Anyway, it's one of the things that confused me about the announcement. Now, would I recommend Lord of the Rings Online to a person? Now, basically in my brain, I think there are 2 core players that would enjoy Lord of the Rings Online tremendously. The first player is someone who just wants to go on an adventure to a world they've never been before, or they love Tolkien's work or whatever. Going in and just playing the story of Lord of the Rings Online from 1 to 150, and just going to all the areas, experiencing the stories, and just questing through it solo and just enjoying yourself, you'll have a tremendously great experience. That's how I started. I basically was like, well, I don't really want to play WoW again because I played on private servers. I was like, I know all the stuff. Like, I want to play a story that I've never seen before. You know, like, just experience a completely refreshed look. And that sort of a player will love Lord of the Rings Online. Now, the second person that might enjoy Lord of the Rings Online is someone who actually enjoys doing hard dungeon or raid content, but doesn't want group DPS meters or mechanics logs or, you know, add-ons telling you what to do and when to do it. Lord of the Rings Online is a game where there's not a lot of guides and logs and things telling you this is your build, this is the gear you need. A lot of it is speculation. A lot of people that make guides are actually terrible, and you should never follow their guides because, you know, obviously I've seen a lot of guides, and then a lot of my friends are like, server first, and they're like, dude, this guide is useless. I would never do this or trade this or, you know, build with this gear in mind. So it's one of those things where you can explore it your own way. You have to figure out what the mechanics of the fights are. Not many people are going to tell you. There's so many strategies of how to do different content and ways to build and get great DPS. It allows you to theory craft, and that was one of the things I enjoyed the most about Lord of the Rings. When I got into raiding and stuff, was sitting with, you know, spreadsheets trying to figure out how do we take out mitigations and pump up our DPS and survive this mechanic, and if you use that ability and I use this, and do they multiplicative effect or add additionally and subtractively. And we had so much fun theory crafting that it made the game like a group enjoyable effort. But if you are a player that does enjoy that fast-paced content, you know, your Guild Wars, World of Warcraft kind of New World kind of style where there's a lot of movement, a lot of dodging, things like that. You want polished gameplay, you want as minimal bugs as possible, and you want great graphics, Lord of the Rings might not be the right game for you. Lord of the Rings Online has dated graphics, it's a lot slower, there are bugs, you know, there's some mechanics that you wouldn't imagine act this way, or sometimes the devs get something wrong and all of a sudden fate applies like some crazy multiply to crit chance or something, and some people figure out the bug and they take advantage of it, and things like this happen. It's a very small dev team and things like that. So if you are one of those players that likes a polished game with just crazy great graphics, Lord of the Rings isn't going to be your game. Anyway, I could go on for hours and hours just ranting and raving about things I like and things I hate, because that's literally my relationship with LOTRO, is literally a love-hate relationship. But anyway, thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, all that cool stuff. It really helps the channel grow. If you didn't enjoy it, thank you anyway for listening, and hopefully I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.